I want to start off by saying that I am the Shadowed One's friend, CJ, that he was talking about. So this is a no disrespect to him. He's been my friend for about, let's say, 8 years now. First, I would say that God is very personal. He's been personal from day one. Um, it says in Genesis chapter 1, I believe it's in the very beginning of Genesis, that God walked with Adam in the cool of the day. So he's been very personal from day one, and then through obviously the fall of man, he could no longer dwell on earth. All that stuff. That's probably for another topic. Um, and then even and then even if you move into around approximately somewhere around 1200 to 1000 years later, he's still personal with Jesus. One of the prophecies about Christ was he will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. And Jesus was. He was both God and man on earth. He was with us in the trenches. He laughed, he cried, he urinated, he ate, he loved, and he was heartbroken, he felt pain. All those things. And he was with us from that time. And even today, God is still just as personal. It's called the Holy Spirit. Most Christians do believe in the Holy Spirit. And what that is, essentially, is God's presence and glory inside um, believers and on earth. And basically, how that came about is through the death of Christ and his resurrection, that um, God no longer had to be limited to only having his presence on earth in the temple of Herod at that time in Jerusalem, in the Holy of Holies. But when that happened, the curtain broke, which is very symbolic inside the temple, and God's glory and dwelling was allowed to be over all of the earth, because through Christ, all of mankind was able to be redeemed. Now, another point that I want to make, that the Shadowed One said, is that God cannot be the model of righteousness. And I wholeheartedly disagree. He and I had a conversation about this last night, and through talking, um, I'm pretty sure that he agreed with, if not all of what I said, at least 95%. Basically, God has to be the model of righteousness because he created the idea of righteousness. Now, I know most of you think that's very relative, but I mean, just for the sake of the argument, let's just say philosophically, if there is a God, then he would have to be all-knowing and all-powerful. And for that to be, that would mean that he pretty much had the say in what was right and just, because he's God. I mean, if there's one God, that means he would have to be all-powerful. I'm not talking about polytheism at all, or pantheism. That's a fun word. So, anyways, most people say that God cannot be the model of righteousness because he is killed, going against one of his own commandments. But that's not true, because actually, not basically, actually, what the commandment says is, thou shalt not commit murder, which is denotatively very different. To commit murder is to premeditatively, with malice, kill someone. Now, carrying out punishment is much different. But you have to understand is that, so God has never murdered someone. He did not break his own rules. And it, he never wanted to kill us. For humanity was never meant to die. If you look at Genesis 1, 2, when it says that, man was supposed to live forever. But then when the fall of man happened, God cursed both man and woman. And he said, you are destined to die. Because he said, if you eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and life, or good and evil, I apologize, good and evil, you will surely die. And he wasn't lying. He said, you will surely die. He didn't say you would instantly die, but he said eventually, or well, he said, surely you will, which eventually they will. So he said, you are destined to die, among other things. Importantly, also, he did not ever forget about who really caused this, which was Satan, or the serpent. And he said this, which is really interesting. He said, through you. Well, basically, no, wait, he didn't say that, I'm sorry. He said, and you, serpent, through Adam, one will come that will crush your head under his heel. That was the first prophecy about Christ, who Christians believe is Jesus of Nazareth. Now, as far as that goes, then you go into covenants, and a covenant was based through Abraham and Jacob, and through their people. So by that was the Mosaic Law, which is basically the penalty of sin is death. And murder was one of those things. Now, that was through Judaism, which also is very connected to Christianity. So Old Testament into New Testament, they're very much correlating and connected. Then you go into this. When a new covenant is established, the old covenant isn't thrown out the window, but it is brought to a new level. So Jesus says this, and through what is called binding and loosening, because most people forget that Jesus was a rabbi. So what would happen is like, I say, this stands into relevance in the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. Now loosening would be like, this is not what God was saying. This is binding and loosening. So rabbis would say things like this: you have heard, but I say this to you. Jesus said that once about the very thing of murder. He said this. He said, you have heard, thou shalt not commit murder. But I tell you this: if a man has hatred in his heart, he has already committed murder. So now the establishment of the new covenant that was going to come through Jesus, he is building a foundation that he's saying, not only don't murder, but don't even hate. And that is a true model of righteousness. And by many standards, by many people's standards, Jesus was very, very morally righteous and morally just. By many people's standards, he never wronged anyone. He got into debates, but he loved people, and he followed God's law. Many people talk about him in the temple, but if you really look at it, he was taking some very shady characters out of God's temple who were cheating people, in a sense, Robin Hood almost. He was driving out people that were extorting great amounts of money from poor people. And he did it with a whip. But if you read the text, he never hit anyone. It says that he drove them out with a whip and said, you've turned the house of prayer into a den of thieves. And so by that very nature, that is why I believe that God is a model of righteousness. And, I know that there's probably more argument to be brought, and I gladly will listen to each argument, and we'll maybe have a good old time of debating, and that's fine. As long as it's clean and it has a purpose behind it, I'm fine with that. Also, just a quick reminder, hopefully you can check my channel, The Pulpit, for not only this video, but an upcoming video very soon about my thoughts on healing and divine intervention. Alright, Shadow One, word up, man. I love you. Bye.